Good morning. We are very fortunate to have with us today Eric Stone, who is the CEO and co-founder of Velano Vascular. And just for full acknowledgement, I'm on the advisory board and very fortunate to be on the advisory board. But Eric has joined us this morning from San Francisco. Also on this with us is my co-conspirator and colleague, Raghu Iyengar, who is also a professor of marketing here at the Wharton School. He is also the director of Wharton Customer Analytics. But let's get started with Eric. And Eric, I want to ask you, just to familiarize our audience with you, if you could give us a brief background of yourself and your current position.
Well, thank you, Raghu and Dave, for having me. I am currently the CEO of Velano Vascular, a company that I co-founded now about 10 years ago with a fellow Wharton alum. I started out in the tech industry in the late 90s and worked in a variety of small software companies, was a consultant, did my MBA at Wharton in the healthcare management program, class of 2007, worked for Abbott Labs, over in Europe and out here in Northern California in a variety of marketing and commercial roles. And while starting Velano and working on it nights and weekends, led the commercial organization for a personalized medicine company in oncology. And outside of Velano, serve on a few different advisory boards for early stage healthcare upstarts, and also do some angel investing in the domain as well. And I should note that, of course, my favorite class while I was a Wharton student was marketing strategy with none other than Professor David Reibstein.
That's why we have you here. I appreciate you doing my marketing. So that's great. And just so people have the context, Velano Vascular, you would consider to be a startup, even though you said you've been working on it for 10 years. It really is still an early stage, and it's a B2B sell. Your customer, describe to us who your customers are.
So first I would share that we refer to ourselves as an upstart. We are a revenue generating company, and we are in dozens of hospitals around the United States. Actually, about 1% of US hospitals use our technology and use it rather ubiquitously. We have a series of vascular access technologies that started with our co-founder and inventor's premise or concept of drawing blood in a far more humane fashion. So there's nothing that's more common and invasive that we do in a hospital every day than the act of drawing blood. And I think you'll be hard pressed to find folks, when you ask the question, who likes getting their blood drawn, that raise their hand in the affirmative. And so the premise behind P2's invention was taking an already indwelling catheter, a short IV catheter, and using our device to draw high quality blood out of it. So what we're talking about here, the domain within which we live, is the inpatient setting. So not when you go for your annual checkup, but when you're in the hospital overnight or for a series of nights, and you need repeat or frequent blood draws. We've developed a humane, effective, efficient way to deliver high quality humane care on the part of our hospitalized patients.
Oh, that's wonderful, Eric. And yes, I was just mentioning today before we started this interview that I've not had the experience yet of having gone to a hospital and having my blood drawn that frequently. So that's good. But with that said, I think just bringing back to the context of the last 8 months or so, every one of us has gone through clearly lots of dramatic changes. How has it been for your organization? Like what has happened, especially from the point of view of hospitals? They obviously are dealing with many other issues right now. So how have things been for the current customers you have and new customers you're getting?
So where to begin? The pandemic, like everyone, has certainly affected our team members and our colleagues. It's affected our customers. It's affected our supply chain. It's affected our partners. And as we think about the last now 11 months, and it's remarkable, it's been almost a year.
Yep.
And we think about the next 12 to 24 months, the implications are quite significant for a company such as ours with the technologies like the ones that we provide. So first, I'll take you back to last March,
Mhm.
where I was on a 5-city, 5-day tour across the country, meeting with partners, hospitals, and get down to Florida on maybe it was the 8th or 9th of March to meet with the leadership in 2 hospitals. One hospital, we have the meeting and it starts with the CEO suggesting that he only has a few minutes and we can speak with his CMO and CNO because he's dealing with crisis.
Mhm.
The other meeting was canceled. By the end of that week, the remainder of our meetings were canceled and flew back from the East Coast. About a week later, we received a call from one of our customers up in Seattle, which was ground zero for the
Mhm.
pandemic, you remember back in February and March, suggesting the need for us to come in and train their staff because a number of their phlebotomy staff who conducted our procedure, the PIVO blood draw procedure, were calling in sick. We then received a call shortly thereafter saying, wait a minute, please don't come in. We actually don't want outside folks in the hospital as we're figuring out what the situation really means for us. Followed by yet another call saying, actually, we need you to train our nurses because the phlebotomy staff is calling in sick across the board. Subsequent to that, we received calls from a partner and customer of ours in California saying, we need to train more nurses because we're not allowing phlebotomists to go into the room, contact precaution rooms.
So that training always would happen in person. And so they're saying, we need training, but wait a minute, don't come.
Right.
I'm hearing this. So how is it, how have you managed that and what's been required?
So that was a rather significant endeavor that I think is going to bear dramatic fruit, not just for our company, but other companies in the industry for decades to come. So our head of innovation and my co-founder led an initiative. It started with training by Zoom, right?
Mhm.
Go fashion Zoom. And it quickly evolved to buying these high-end infusion IV poles that were flexible and could be moved and adjusted accordingly with Samsung tablets, with a software technology developed by a startup here in the Bay Area, where the nurse or phlebotomist could take this stand and wheel it into a COVID or suspected COVID patient's room, hit a button, and would be connected to one of our nurse educators. The evolution of that platform over the course of the subsequent months became semi-autonomous robots made by a robot company that we procured. We took some of the custom developed software and further augmented it with a capability to zoom in and out from the bedside and across the bed onto the patient's arm or hand, where the IV catheter is placed and where the PIVO procedure happens. And at this point, we've now developed a small but mighty fleet of semi-autonomous robots that can be controlled from anywhere around the country, that attach to either the hospital's Wi-Fi and internet system or our own. They have mobile connectivity capabilities on them. And now those are being used to go into contact precaution rooms. You click one button and you're connected to one of our nurse educators at 2 a.m., 7 a.m., 2 p.m. in their home office, kitchen, and they can walk the practitioner at the bedside through the procedure and competency them to deliver optimal care for the patient. And you'll see an announcement from a hospital in New Jersey, Holy Name Medical Center, that came out over the newswire this morning, where they announced their adoption of this technology and this education capability. So a far cry from where we were 10 years ago when we were working on a medical device nights and weekends to today being able to augment our technology with services to help folks that are on the front lines deliver critical care.
Wow, I mean that's I mean in some sense, as we've gone through some of these interviews that Dave and I have done, clearly crisis brings up innovations, but this is a big dramatic step. Were you already thinking about these steps, or did COVID sort of accelerate it, or was this a complete pivot that you had to do? Just take us through that experience of being an upstart, as you call it. What kind of things did you have to do on the back end? Perhaps acquiring more people, perhaps training them differently. How did that go about?
So certainly a pivot. We had identified that the business model of nurse educators. We work with per diem nurses who have other jobs and work hourly to support training and education as we onboard a hospital on a completely novel procedure that, if you think about the scope, touches every patient in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So training thousands of nurses, tens or hundreds of phlebotomists, depending on how large the health system is or how large the hospital is. And to think about the impact on time, on investment and economics to fly folks around the country, right? Still, as a small organization with a relatively small commercial team, we're relying on those per diems to do a lot of really critical and important work in partnership with us. Now, to have a technology that is dependable, that still gives you that interaction with that human being who can provide the right kind of not only education and training, but context around the patient setting, I think really is going to be transformative for our business and our business model. I think there's also potential implications and benefits around doing work outside the US and in other countries. And as we envision taking PIVO, our procedure, to every hospital and every patient around the world, I think this pivot's going to be a really important enabler. We've certainly had a number of large companies in the industry suggest to us, can you share how you did this? This looks interesting. And if we had the hours in the day and we had the venture capital investment, we would spin out a separate company and just create digital remote training capabilities that are somewhat personalized, if you will, because I think the demand is great. Just like we saw with telepresence, I think on-site virtual training is going to be really critical for a host of different procedures.
So indeed, let me just follow up with that, Eric, that it seems like being able to do this robotic digital training, it should be applicable not just to the technology that you've got, but that it should be relatively ubiquitous for all sorts of different medical applications. Is there a vision of doing that?
There's certainly a vision. I think the question is going to be how soon that becomes a reality from our perspective. We have a technology with immense demand from hospitals around the country and actually outside the United States. And this comes back to the life of an entrepreneur and being an upstart, which is the distinguishing or making decisions around focus versus breadth. And we face those questions and those diversions in path every day. So there certainly is an aspiration on our part to make this capability even beyond medical and even beyond hospitals. Think about the manufacturing industry. I'm sure if we found ourselves in an Amazon warehouse and facility, we'd see a lot of technology along the lines of what we're talking about here. However, the healthcare industry is just not a pioneering industry relative to some others. They tend to be more of a fast follower. I'm not sure what we've developed here is profound in the form of its technology, but I think the use case around what we're doing certainly is novel, and there's a lot of benefit to it.
So Eric, one of the things that we found, I'm sure, especially you might have seen in the last few months or so, is that from a consumer point of view, the end consumers, they have been, really relying on brands that they can trust, so to speak. Now, from your point of view, have you seen some shift from your clients or customers?
So credibility is certainly something we think quite a bit about, and something that we face on a daily basis, being a small, relatively unknown organization in a land filled with giants. And we very much think about ourselves as the little engine that could, or a David versus Goliath. So I have two reactions in response to the question. One, as we think about the credibility associated with our organization, in the early days, there was certainly a lot of skepticism. We've worked and discussed with a large health system, adopting it across their hospital for every patient and train all practitioners. And in particular, supply chain organizations would say, well, can you scale? Can you make 200,000 units or 400,000 devices a year? And so over the years, we've invested quite dramatically in scaling our technical enterprise such that we've got semi-automated manufacturing lines that can make many, many millions of devices a year. And you won't find a whole lot of small venture-backed upstarts like ours that have made those investments, because we know that that credibility is critical. And who wants to spend 2 years delivering humane care and go back to mercilessly shish kebabbing your patients at 3 a.m. after you've had. On the other side of the coin, we've found at the start of the pandemic in particular that the supply chains of the multinational providers, where a lot of manufacturing has been conducted outside the US, have been severely compromised at a critical time. And not just PPE, not just personal protective equipment, but technologies in the blood collection domain, the vascular access domain, the respiratory domain, and on and on and on. We have, I believe, 99% of our manufacturing supply chain, maybe 95%, is either US or, for the most part, Europe. And so we have had no supply disruptions associated with our capabilities. We, though, of course, took a very good and hard look early on, reached out to some customers and said, do you want to take on some additional inventory because of potential supply disruptions, not related to our supply chain, but distribution capabilities. Remember, moving of freight last March and April across the country by trucks and others were suspect. There was so much uncertainty. So that, I think, alongside the work that we've done, again, an announcement this morning from an exceptional health system in New Jersey that has done a lot of firsts. I think they were the first Regeneron trial last spring around COVID, announced their adoption of our technology. We'll have some other health systems making announcements shortly around adopting the technology. And our ability to continue to bring this transformative capability in the middle of a global pandemic to hospitals, I think only signifies not just credibility around the company, but utility of the technology.
So Eric, I want to go back to something you were talking about earlier that I think is relevant to all sorts of different businesses, particularly B2B businesses. And that is, you started off by talking about, you were on a trip to 5 different locations, and your sales force it was personal selling, and that's in the hospital talking to your customers. You have had to convert that to doing the selling online. I want to know sort of A, how that has gone, and B, I mean, obviously you've got people not spending time traveling, not spending time, money on airfare and hotels and meals, et cetera, but instead doing it most likely from their home. Overall, has that increased efficiency? And I'm also looking towards the future. Do you think this is, once we get past this pandemic, is this going to be the mode going forward?
Dave, there is so much to that question. So the entrepreneur's journey is reflective of the highs are high and the lows are low, sometimes within the same hour. So let me take you back to last April and May, where we set up 4 distinct task forces in the organization. And one of them was expressly focused on how do we sell in this new environment? And there was uncertainty. Is this going to happen for the next 6 months? Is COVID going to be here for the next 2 years? I very much was in the frame of mind of this is here for a while, far longer than we would like. And what you're referring to with respect to the boots on the ground approach of selling is we call it access to customers, access to hospitals, both physical, but also share of voice, share of mind. Can we get their attention? And over the course of the next few months, we came up with a host of different approaches, outreach approaches, communication approaches, where we relied on existing customers to reach out to their peers at other institutions, to establish a connection. We identified select geographies where we had anchor customers, and we started campaigning, if you will, very subtly and respectfully. And I should add that we held back from active outreach for probably a good 4 months out of respect from what we heard from our friends who are hospital CEOs and CNOs and CMOs to what we saw on the news about how hospitals were just utterly inundated. And individual practitioners were making determinations around the safety and well-being of their patients and their patients' families, and the safety and well-being of their own families. Now, I would say in the fall, we started to reach back out in a more active fashion on the heels of some of these campaigns, and we embraced technology. And the beautiful thing is that our customers embraced technology. And so I think where you were going with the question is that a day doesn't go by where I'm not on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or insert name of 50 other technology platforms where we're talking with the senior leadership team or the experts and SMEs within a particular hospital. And while it certainly lacks some of the personal touch that's so important in our industry, it's enabled us to be more efficient financially, more efficient operationally, more efficient with our time. And we're launching new hospitals now every month based on the work that we did in the second half of last year that was enabled not just by technology, because that's too easy of an answer, was enabled by the willingness of our customer base to engage differently. And honestly, I think to engage in the only way that they truly had capacity to engage. There's a whole other side of the coin, which has to do with the safety and well-being of my colleagues and our nurse educators who go into a hospital every day. And I'm not sure if you want to go there, but as you think about the decision-making as a leader, as you think about your decision-making as an entrepreneur, those decisions affect not only the patients and the customers, but your colleagues, their families. And so the complexity of the last year and the decisions that have had to be made certainly are by far the greatest and most complex of any I've had to undertake over the last 20 plus years.
Oh, I think I can understand. I mean, the magnitude of the decisions, all the different stakeholders involved, clearly, quite a challenging task. So one of the things, Eric, again, from the perspective of a smaller company, we've had conversations, Dave and I, with much larger companies, and, we've gone through lots of exactly the kinds of things that you were talking about, but they're also forecasting what might happen in the future, who may they have to employ as they are trying new innovations. So how has it happened within a smaller company? Did, for example, the talent that you already have to take on more roles? Or did you have to employ other people who perhaps were more suited for this point in time? Just take us through that dynamic.
I think this goes back in part to the question about when we set up the virtual educator program, did we need to onboard different expertise and resources? And we have a number of exceptional jack of all trades professionals in the organization. I think there's some self-selection bias when you join an earlier stage company, either around an interest in, a capacity for, or a combination thereof to wear multiple hats. And so we joke internally that we all have multiple jobs, but just a fraction of one salary. And so the technology program that we developed was supported by our co-founder, our quality and operations team, our nursing education team, our lead engineer, and we brought no external resource in. We just found partner companies and partner technologies, and we say we build the plane as we're flying it. We learned on the job as well. Now, with that said, as we think about moving forward, back to the previous question, I think the way that we sell, I think the way that we train, I think the way that we support customers, and I think the way that we develop this market, because what we're doing is completely transformative, are all going to be different than they were historically from a host of perspectives. And I think we will need to augment our capabilities with folks that have lived through robust, transformative times and have changed the face of the game from the perspective of, even from a marketing perspective, talking with two esteemed marketing colleagues, the way our customers, who, if you think about it, alongside the mom and pop shops and restaurants, are probably the most severely affected by this pandemic and will have a tail effect much longer than many other industries. The way they digest information, the way they embrace change, the way they think about quality, the way they think about investment, it's going to be different. So I think we've got the team to pivot and to navigate those uncharted waters. I also think we're going to need some additional expertise that has lived through periods like this before.
Outstanding. There's so many things that you've shared with us that I think are insightful, not just in hearing what it is that you've done, but are applicable to their business. But we are really out of time, and it leaves me just with the opportunity to ask one last question, which is, what advice would you provide to others and other organizations that you've sort of gained from your experience that you could share with others?
If you're in a role or an organization that is driven by a mission orientation, I would suggest that no matter how hard it gets, no matter how challenging the environment is, fall back on your own personal individual why. I received an email this morning from Kelly, the mother of a young man, Jack, who we met 4.5 years ago at a children's hospital in Utah. And you can find Jack's story in a video on our website. And I woke up this morning to an email from Kelly suggesting that they had just moved from Florida to Colorado, and how she thinks of us often, how she talks about our technology frequently. And Jack has a series of chronic challenges and spends a lot of time in the hospital. And I've stayed in touch with Kelly and Jack, but it's been a good year and a half since I've connected with them, in part because of lack of traveling. And receiving an email like that and sharing it, and there was a picture embedded in the email of Jack, and sharing anecdotes like that with the team helps remind us why, when we are facing in the middle of a global pandemic challenges at home, in our work environment, and from so many other perspectives, why we do what we do. We just can't give up, because what we as an organization are doing is just too important to medicine. And we're all going to end up in a hospital someday, all three of us. It might be the start of life, it might be the end of life, it may be somewhere along the journey of life. And this procedure, the PIVO procedure, when we do what we set out to do, is going to touch every single one of us.
Wow, that's a great story. And so thank you very much for sharing that. It is, a touching story. And it is clear you are running a business, but you also have a mission, and you're touching people's lives. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being with us, and good luck moving forward. So appreciate the time that you've spent with us now. So thank you very much.
Thank you both. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.